We're all good?
Yeah, and now I'm going to go quiet, and I'm going to let you... wait, I need to intro you. What a bad person am I? Why didn't you tell me that? I'm sure that you're going to introduce yourself as well, but I need to say something. I've been in testing a little bit over 2 years, to say the least. But one of the things that I like, I remember starting, and it was back when it was not the Ministry of Testing, it was the Software Testing Club. And I remember reading a lot about...
That's 2008.
We said we're not going to be naming names now. But I remember Rosie, and I remember seeing this person, Maverick Tester. And the first thing that came to mind was, Maverick, isn't that like Top Gun, 1980s? But it was very resembled. I'm not going to say anything again. But I really liked what you were writing and the ideas that you had in there. And I started following you, and it was amazing. So it's actually kind of nice having you here right now, and we're very grateful that you agreed on doing this talk. So you're going to be talking a little bit about what's happening now, meaning with the pandemic and everything that is going on. So I'm pretty much looking forward to it. So that's it. I'm done.
Okay.
Letting you go, and take it from here.
Okay. All right. Thanks a million, Joel. And look, really happy to be here today. Just going to get everyone to do a bit of a shake of the hands. You know, maybe it's early morning for you and you just had your first coffee, or you're not quite awake. So just give yourself a big stretch or jump up and down a bit. Or maybe it's late at night. I think Lisa Crispin said she was going to try and call in, and it was 10 o'clock at night. So maybe, you know, if you're just about to go to bed, just give yourself a big stretch, and we'll get into this, because there's some things I want to share today that really this is more, you know, it's about leadership. But really leadership comes from experience. And the reason why I'm talking about this stuff today is because I've learned a lot of this the hard way. And so these are kind of my insights that I've got from being in the software testing industry for about 30 years now. So I just thought I'd just share some of these ideas. The other thing is, just wanted to mention at the start that this is, you know, my insights, my learning, and everyone's got a slightly different style of leadership. So some of these things you might go, well, I do that naturally, right? And that's fantastic. And, you know, that's really great. Other people might not have those same skill sets. So, you know, I think it's really valuable to just have a step back and think, you know, we all have different sets in our leadership. We have different strengths and other things that we're working on. All right, that's it. What I wanted to talk to you today is about some stuff that's really topical. It's like the elephant in the room. You know, we're talking about all these different things about machine learning and all these wonderful things in software testing, and they're really important. But, you know, we are in unprecedented times, aren't we? And I don't need to tell you about all the massive changes that we're having this year with climate change, democracy. I could go on and on and on. I'm going to try and not go into that too much, because you know what it's like. You know, it's been pretty crappy, right? I'm going to use an analogy today from The Wizard of Oz. Now, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she gets tossed up in a tornado. She lands in the land of Oz, right? And she meets all these munchkins, and she's like, well, where the hell am I? And all she wants to do, she decides, I need to get home. And Glinda, the wicked witch, or sorry, the good witch, she says, all you need to do is follow the yellow brick road. And so Dorothy decides that she's going to follow the yellow brick road, get to the Emerald City, where she will meet the Great Oz, and the Great Oz will tell her how to do that. So I'm not the Great Oz at all. I do live in Australia, but it does not make me great. But I hope that today we'll get some insights about some of the experiences that I have had, so maybe you don't have to do the same. All right. Okay, as I said, 2020. Can we just skip to 2021, please, quickly? You know, it's just been crazy with the amount of change that we've had, you know, and the amount of uncertainty that's brought. Everybody's working from home. We're all online, right? We've got new sets of problems to deal with that we didn't have last year, or not as much. You know, how do we deal with burnout? How do we balance our work life? For some of us it's better, but for some of us it's not so great, because it's really hard to identify boundaries, and we're having to acquire new skills, right? How do we deal with all this online time? Distributed teams are becoming more of a thing, and of course, first remote. You know, who would have thought? We knew it was heading there, but the fact that it's rapidly escalated and it's become, you know, the pandemic has really made this a forefront in a lot of companies' minds. And of course, I don't have to talk about, you know, the cheap hardware, mesh networks, machine learning. I mean, we just think we got our heads around microservices, and around comes mesh networks. Right? It's like, oh my God, how are we going to test this one? And so there was a lot of stuff to pick up, a lot of stuff to learn, and a lot of uncertainty, especially around our jobs, right? And, you know, we've always lived with this kind of lurking thing behind us, this gray thing about testing being dead, you know. And of course, those of us who've been in the industry knows that this is pretty much a pile of poo, but it doesn't stop it going away. It doesn't go away. And so it's constantly there in the background, and we're constantly having to deal with that, I guess, unspoken or sometimes spoken conversation about how do we reduce the cost of testing? How do we actually make our testing more valuable? And you can read between the lines there is, how do we have less testers? You know, and that's a scary thing. So we want a vision, right? We want a better world. We don't want to deal with all this, right? It's tough going at the moment. We want to have a Glinda who tells us what to do, don't we? And unfortunately, we don't have that. And so we're looking around us. We're trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? Should I stay in testing? Maybe I should become a developer. Maybe I need to go into product, you know? And so these questions are constantly there, lurking in our backgrounds. And I don't know about you, but for me anyway, I get to this kind of paralysis. Some people, you know, that rabbit in the headlights moment where you're just kind of stuck because there's so much uncertainty. You're not sure what decision to make. The actual consequences of your decisions seem huge, and that can make it really hard to move forward. And so, you know, there's been times where I've just wanted to hunker down, you know, pull that duvet back over my head and just not deal with the world. You know, Dorothy felt lost too, right? And Glinda gave her that journey. And she ended up going on the yellow brick road. She found 3 companions, yeah? The Tin Man, the Lion, and the Scarecrow. And they were looking for things too, right? The Tin Man, he was looking for a heart. The Scarecrow, he wanted to have brains. And who was the final one? Oh yeah, the Lion. The Lion wanted courage. And so they were all felt that if they could get to Oz, then the Great Wizard of Oz could sort out all these problems for them. Let's see what they can teach us. All right, here we go. Poor Scarecrow. All he wanted to do was to be able to be treated as smart, you know. We all like to be smart. We all like for people to think us as smart. In software testing, if you think about it, a lot of what we do is about thinking up new ideas, new test ideas, new ways of breaking software. We think of new ways of exploring how to solve problems. We have critical thinking to help us through that. We've also got lateral thinking, and we, you know, that sort of ability to think out of the box. So we've actually got a lot of innate thinking skills that we use in software testing. And anyone who's been in testing for a while knows these things, right? We know that we have this ability to look at things at a systems level and also at a deep complex level. But if we think about it, how can these brains help us through all this uncertainty? All right. So the first thing I have learned is try to not get too fixated on things. Now, we've seen people outside of testing get fixated on how to do testing, right? Everyone outside of testing is an expert on testing, right? Oh, you just need to automate all the things. You know, how many times we've heard that? And really, you know, there's a lot of opinions about what we should do. And they get fixated on this one idea. But we get fixated too, yeah? So we get fixated on maybe the ways we like to test. We love exploratory testing. That's our jam. And we want to do that. Or, you know, we have a software test automation framework that we find is incredibly, you know, we're incredibly good at that. We're very experienced. And so we tend to come and lean to that solution when the problem occurs. So that's a kind of examples of fixation. We stick to what we know. But let's try and get out of that a little bit. Let's try and shake that. It's not that those things are bad. Those are fantastic things. And it's great to be skilled at something. But we want that toolbox, right? We want that toolbox of lots of different skill sets or lots of different things that we can use and we can pull out. So I like to think about optionality. Now, optionality is, you know, that ability to look at, like it says what it is, right? Look at different options. Jerry Weinberg had a rule of three, right? Where he said, if you're trying to come up with a solution, think about maybe three ways. So you come up with the first one, but try and think of two alternative ways to solve that problem. You know, even if you end up going back to your first solution, because it's the best one, you will find that the fact that you've able to diversify your thinking and look at things alternatively probably will strengthen that first solution. So it's a really good idea to try and look at different options. I had when I was head of engineering, I had a couple of developers. They were working on a solution, and the team had two different ideas of how to solve the problem. This was a technical problem they were trying to solve. And they couldn't figure out which was the best way to solve that problem. One of the challenges was they just didn't have enough information, right, to be able to make that decision. So what the team decided to do in the end was to actually implement both. And by implementing both, they could learn about which one was better. And by the end of it, they were able to make a choice about which option they would choose. Now, of course, we don't always have the ability to do that. But let's try and encourage ourselves to think, and those around us to think in that way, that there are potentially other solutions and we could try them. Now, I did touch on, you know, that those people outside of testing who absolutely know this is the solution. We just need machine learning. It's going to solve all our problems, right? And we sort of politely roll our eyes inwardly, of course, because, you know, or else we shout and scream at them. I don't know what your personality is, but I tend to kind of sit there quietly rolling my eyes inward. We want to shift that conversation. I find one of the big things over time that has helped me do this is actually not talk about software testing. It kind of sounds weird, I know, but you know, I've been in situations where I've tried to argue my way or tried to logically reason my way through a situation. You know, what do you mean by software testing? You know, is it software testing or is it quality assurance? You know, and you know, these are great questions, but they need to be put in the right context. When you want to shift a conversation and you want to change maybe how you're trying to convince someone, maybe another way that you could explore is to actually not talk about software testing at all. I talk about quality. So I kind of give them some thought exercises like, imagine if you couldn't do any software testing, how would you know you have quality? And the idea there is to try and help that person shift their thinking into that dependency on software testing only. Maybe there are other approaches that would be quicker or faster to help the team actually find that information in a different way. Maybe we don't have to test everything before we release. Maybe it's okay to do some testing in production. Trying to have those conversations where you shifting that conversation. So maybe think outside the box a bit about how you approach the conversations. And is there another way that you can frame that. That doesn't necessarily talk about testing. Maybe it talks about something that that person cares about. Maybe that's a more useful approach to go to. Another way I kind of try and shift things is by talking about outcomes. So, you know, I spend a lot of time testing, and a lot of the time in testing, you get caught up in conversations about test coverage, you know, how many bugs we've found, those sorts of conversations. And I call those outputs, right? They're outputs, they're things that come out of as a result of testing. So if you look at this table that I have realized I am not showing you, we want to have, there's two things. There's testing outcomes, that's things on the left, and then there's testing outputs. So testing outputs tend to be the things that come as a result of testing, you know, like test coverage, bugs found, bugs fixed. But really, that's not why people, it might be why we test. We might be testing to find those things. But people in a senior position, honestly, they're not really interested in those things. They might appear to be interested because that's all they know to talk about, but what they're really interested in is the outcomes. They're looking for confidence in their release, right? Rightly or wrongly, this is what they want. They want some consistency. If you talk to any CTO or senior engineering manager, what they're looking for is consistency of release. They don't want surprises. And they especially don't want surprises right before release, okay? So that's why they're testing. So if that's why they're testing, how can we shift our conversation to those outcomes that they want? How can we frame what we need in terms of what they need? And by aligning our conversations, we've got a much better chance of actually achieving and getting what we need to do a good job. Another kind of way I've been exploring about looking at things different, and I have Maret to help me, to thank me in this as well, because she was definitely the final piece in the jigsaw that sort of helped me put this together. And I have to tell you the story. When I was working, I was living in Ireland, and I went to a train the trainer class. And part of the train the trainer is you had to stand up and talk about what you did and provide some sort of insight into your field. And we came from a lot of diversity. It wasn't just tech, it was lots of diversity in that class. And so when I stood up, I was trying to explain what I did, what software testing was and what I did. And the trainer said, in his best Irish accent, which I probably will kill, but anyway, I'll give it a go. He said, let me get this right. Imagine if I had a bicycle, and as I had the bicycle and I had a puncture in my bicycle and I took it down to the garage to get fixed. And the guy in the garage looks at my bicycle, has a look at the wheel, and he goes, yeah, there's the hole, and then walks away. Is that what you do? And it was like, I was kind of shocked. Part of me was like, oh no, it's a lot more complicated than that. But to some degree, it was right. All I was doing was finding bugs. I wasn't fixing them. And whereas the finding is an enormously complex, and we know this is, so I don't have to convince you on this. We know that finding bugs is a tough job. It's hard, and it takes a lot of skill to find difficult bugs. But the ultimate outcome that people want is to have those bugs fixed, bringing value to the customer, to the consumer as fast as possible. That's what they're interested in. So let's think about that when we're actually finding bugs. So yes, we must find bugs, but maybe, just maybe, we could be fixing those bugs too. Maybe there are some things that you can do to help you acquire more technical skills and pair with developers to help you fix those bugs. Or maybe they could do, you know, they can check your pull requests and things like that. There's so much we could do in this space. There's so many ways we can manage this and reduce the risk of, you know, a catastrophe that we could probably provide a lot of value in. So maybe just start thinking about that. How can I not just find, but also fix? Now, I don't think I've had one talk in the last 4 years without giving a nod to Elizabeth Henderson. It's was one of my biggest Gestalt moments when I read her blog post about recovery over perfection, because it's so important. When I look at continuous delivery and I look at, you know, the way we deploy software, the way we are deploying minimal amounts of software rapidly, and the sense of just testing a product right before release just is not making sense to me anymore. And so when she wrote this blog post, it was just like my brain just went, you know, this is so true. It's like we need to be focusing. Sure, we want to have fantastic software. We want to test as well as we can. But we want to start thinking about how can we recover quickly from problems in production? How can we recover before our consumers even know there's a problem there? You know, how cool would that be? And so being able to identify root cause, being able to figure those things out before in production and before our consumers find them, then to me is gold. And this leads to, you know, this talk about observability, the able to observe systems so that you can identify the root cause quickly. So definitely, I think this is sort of one of the great ways that we can start moving into this space. And how can we get better at understanding and looking at our systems in production? So yes, with monitoring and analytics, but also, you know, being able to look at tracing, trace IDs, getting your hands a little bit dirty in that space, trying to find out what you can do to actually start getting experience in looking at those sorts of things, because I think they're going to be really, really useful for us as software testers. And maybe many of you doing this anyway, but for me, it was certainly, you know, a kind of a push, a definitive, this is where we need to be heading. Another kind of mind blow moment was Kent Beck's 3X model. Now, I've been looking at this for a while, but I suddenly realized Kent Beck's got this model and he's talking about, you know, really he talks about a product here. So I'll explain this to you a little bit. He talks about, you know, in a product life cycle, that there's really 3 stages that you go through. There's the explore bit. And that's when you're trying to understand what your product looks like. Maybe you're kind of doing MVPs. You're really not sure, you know, you have some idea, you have a hypothesis, but you need to do quite a few little experiments to try and figure out exactly what that product is and what shape, what color it looks like. And hopefully, you know, you're doing that by testing on your consumers, right? So you're developing a little product, you're putting it out to the market, you're getting some good feedback or hopefully feedback, positive or negative, and you're really learning about what that product should look like. What do my consumers really, really want? Now, heaps of uncertainty in this phase, right? You really don't know what you're doing. And I think about this in sort of like startups. If you think about startups, you know, it's like flying by the seat of your pants a little bit. You really don't know. It's really risky, could easily fail. Most startups do fail. But you know what? You're there for the ride and let's just give this a go, right? Loads of fun. So there's that. That's the explore phase. That's in the purple. In the blue, we got the expand. Now, right at the moment, right, there's a pivot. Once you get past startup, once you get the purple, suddenly, hopefully, you figured out what your product is and you're like, yay! And it's like you discover that the secret sauce that your consumers love and you're building this beautiful, beautiful product. And suddenly things go crazy, right? The world changes, you know, you're hiring massive amounts of people, developers, customer support, product, everyone's hiring massively and teams are growing. You know, suddenly your system, which only had, you know, 500 subscribers now has to manage 150,000 subscribers. So your architecture has to be reviewed. You've got to scale. And, you know, this is the time typically where quality starts to drop a bit, right? Because, you know, the things that were working as a startup that you got away with because you had great collaboration, it was a small team. And so all you had to do was tap a person's shoulder on the other side and you could have that kind of conversation. that doesn't work anymore. Things start falling apart because, you literally have all these new people who don't have the domain knowledge and the context of those early decision makers. And then finally, if you survive that one, you've got another pivot, and you pivot into the green. And this is the extract, right? This is where, the payoff is. So, if you think about someone investing in a product, this is where you start making the moolah, the money, because this is really where you start looking at efficiencies. Your product, your subscribers are sold on what you do, and really you're looking to streamline things to make things more cost effective and really get that return on investment. Now you're like, okay, that's really interesting. What the hell has this got to do with quality? So as I was looking at this, it suddenly occurred to me, this is that curve there, which I've got sort of quality with a question mark all the way up. That curve is quality, or it needs to be our quality strategy, because our quality strategy is absolutely needs to change depending on whether we're in explore, expand, or extract. Our quality strategy needs to be different when the number of subscribers is low and there's a lot of uncertainty around. We've got to be able to, for example, pivot really quickly. We've got to be able to do our testing rapidly. We've got to understand that in Explore, the most important aspect of quality is understanding that do we have the right product? If you think about quality in terms of, do I have how do I know I've got a good product versus am I building the right product versus am I building the product right? And then am I supporting the product in the right way? So if you think about three of those aspects of a Venn diagram, in the startup phase, am I building the right product is really the most important question when it comes to quality. And maybe that question changes over time to, on the right-hand side, when you're in extract, it's about, am I building the product right? And am I building it in an efficient way? So we're looking at the manufacturing, the operation side of it. And so really, I look at this model and I think, this reflects in a way how our quality strategy has to change and morph over the different stages of a product life cycle. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. It kind of gets me really excited, which is why I've spent some time on it. Hopefully, I haven't bored you too much with that. But anyway, that's just one of the things there that maybe we can start looking at things in a slightly different way. And how do we deal with the uncertainty? How do we deal with all these different things? Another thing that I'm going to quickly touch on is that concept of emergent quality. So, when we think of quality, we leap to product quality. Now, that's really obviously important. It's what we do. We're trying to understand the state of quality of a product. But I think, because of the way that we actually create software today and the way that we deploy and the way that we build our systems in very small batches, that really we need to think more about the concept that quality emerges out of things. It's not something you can define. It's not easy to see. We all know it's impossible. It's really hard to see, right? But it's also very hard to define. And I think part of that is that when we look at our systems today, we need to start breaking down product quality and realize that it's an ecosystem. It's not just product. It's the infrastructure. It's the processes around how a team operates. It's the people and their skill sets. And it's absolutely the outcomes that the business are looking for. And we want to take those into consideration. And it's a combination of all those things that makes the quality. So think about it in your days, like, how am I incorporating these different aspects? How are people impacting my quality? How are the processes that I'm using? How is my infrastructure impacting quality? So finally, looking at quality coaching. So I'm just going to flick this up really quickly. So if you think about many teams, and this is not for every company, and this is certainly not for everyone, but When I was working in head of engineering, one of the things that we had, and many of you have this already, is having testers within the cross-functional teams. And what I witnessed was that as time evolved, not every team, but quite a few teams got to the point where the tester really was kind of going, I really don't know what I should be doing anymore, because my developers have watched and witnessed how I operate, and they have adopted some of those skills and embedded them into how they operate. So to some degree, I don't really need to be there anymore. And it was like, oh, that's so fantastic. That's such a great thing. Now, not everyone sees it that way, but I see it that way. Because to me, it's like risk is everywhere. And where there's risk, there's need for testing. So it's just a question of going, okay, well, if my team is not needing this anymore, where are the risks and how can I identify them? And how can I help my teams build that up? So enter the concept of a quality coach. And I bet many of you look at this, go, well, I do that already. So now you have a name for what you do. Okay, but really what they're doing is they're coaching others in software testing. And this might not just be developers, but it could be product people. I think there's a really interesting path there for many testers to go into product and provide insights in risk on product. It's facilitating. So no longer do we really have this, we own the test strategy, you know. And this is such a mental shift for many of us. Having to let go owning the test strategy is a big deal. Well, it was a big deal for me. Maybe you're more mature, but certainly for me, it was a big shift of handing this testing strategy over to the team and allowing the team to really make decisions about how we should test. But I think it's that if you truly believe that your team, and you truly believe that quality is a team responsibility and your team plays a part in that, then you can't just give people responsibility without the autonomy to make decisions. So you really have to hand that over to people, enable them to start making calls about how testing should operate, and support them in their journey as they learn how to do that. Also, obviously, advocating for quality. I think a big part of what a quality coach can do is also promoting quality. And be that, I mean, it's about talking to other teams about what other teams are doing, talking to senior management, making that quality visible when sometimes it's not easy to do, to see it. Talking about dashboards and how you can actually make it easier for people to see what is quality. Have agreements about what exactly do we actually agree what quality is? Do we know? Or do we just kind of all nod when we say quality is a team responsibility, but nobody really knows what that means? Or it's like, well, that just means everybody tests. And I'm like, really? Really? Could it be something different? Do we want it to be something different? These are really interesting questions. Okay, right. A lot of talk about the brain. It's time to move to the heart. You know, poor Tin Man, all he wanted to do was to love. You know, this is tough. You know, we see ourselves, for many of us, we see ourselves in tech as quite logical beings, don't we? We sort of, you know, we base our decisions on reason, and we base our decisions on logical thought and a process, and we're quite methodical in that. The reality, though, is that we are slightly different. We don't actually, scientists tells us actually a different story. And there's they describe this, psychologists describe this as two systems in our brain, the rational system and the emotional system. Now, I want to show you this video. Hopefully I can play it. Otherwise, if I can't play it, I'll just describe it. You can dance along to it too if you like, or not.
Psychologists know that there are two systems in our brains, the rational system and the emotional system. Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist at NYU, came up with a great analogy for these two systems He said, think of your brain as a human rider atop an elephant. The rider represents the rational system. That's the part of us that plans and problem solves. The rider might do some analyzing and decide, hey, I want to go that way. But it's the elephant, representing the emotional system, that provides the power for the journey. The rider can try to lead the elephant or drag the elephant, but if these two ever disagree, who would you bet on? The elephant has a 6-ton weight advantage, and it's exactly that power imbalance that makes adopting new behaviors very hard. If you want this duo to head in a new direction, you also need to think about the path, which represents the external environment. This duo is more likely to complete a journey if you can shorten the distance and remove any obstacles in their way. So bottom line, if you want to lead change, you've got to do 3 things. Give direction to the rider, knowledge of how to get to the destination. You've got to motivate the elephant, which means tapping into emotion. And finally, you need to shape the path to allow for easy progress. That's how change happens.
All right. Okay, so what's this got to do with testing and you know, why are we talking about it here? I think for me, I mean, when I look at some of the aspects of quality coaching, a lot of the questions I get asked around influence. How do you influence people? How do you motivate developers to do more testing? How do you motivate them? And I always go back to that video, and I think about, you know, often we go to logical reasons, and I think logic plays a definite part. Having data plays a definite part. Collecting data eases people in their logical thinking. But the reality is that a lot of what is happening here is about our feelings. It's about how we feel about something, and that is driving our decision making a lot more than the logical fact. So this is not an easy area to navigate, and I'm not going to pretend I've got some simple solution for you how to get through this. But I think it's really useful to be able to be aware that what we're dealing with here is not a logical thing. It's more about dealing with people's emotions, understanding them. Now, one of the ways that we can try and get a better understanding of how people feel about something is by asking questions, right? And Ann Calder, a tester in Europe, she told me about this Verwondering exercise, which is, I just love it to bits. So I'm going to share it with you. Verwondering is a Dutch term that apparently translates badly into being curious. And I guess really it's really simple in its nature. But if you're in a situation where you're feeling things aren't just appear to be complicated, there appears to be conflict, maybe, you know, the developers who are meant to be doing testing are not doing the testing, right? Now, it's really easy for us to jump in there. Our brain just jumps in there and tells us a story. Actually, Brené Brown calls this a shitty first draft, SFD, right? And the shitty first draft basically jumps in and tells you a familiar story about that situation. So say you see these developers and they're not doing testing, you go, oh, developers don't care about testing, right? That's your SFD. So what I would really encourage you to do is just take a step back from that and start asking questions about why. And I mean really questions, not ones with the solution in the back of your head already, that you're just trying to validate and confirm that this is your hypothesis. Try and be curious for the sake of curiosity. Genuine curiosity. Why is the release late? Why aren't there any testers in the meeting? Why don't they have enough time? Why are things so? And has anyone tried to fix that situation before? What happened when they did? And really importantly, what fears are driving these behaviors? So just have a think about that. Before you jump in, it's, you know, look, I'm talking about myself here, but before you jump into a situation, maybe just take a step back and try and put those assumptions aside and get curious about who they are and why are they in that situation. Okay. So there's another aspect to relationships, and I think this is something really that's highlighted for me. I've really brought to home for me is the importance of collaboration and how important humans are in their lives. Doesn't that sound terrible? But really, it's the pandemic to me has emphasized the importance of family, the importance of having close friends around me, and really has surfaced where my values are. And I think also we've seen a little bit less of perfection in people, haven't we? You know, we've been in Zoom meetings where babies are going across the front of the desks and, you know, dogs are walking in and barking. And I don't know if you heard, but my son was playing basketball and having a conversation in the back, just as I was trying to talk through one of the slides. You know, it's not perfect anymore, is it? And I think that's good. That's a healthy thing. And so for me, one of the things I'd like to see in 2021 is that continuing, that openness, that willingness to share your humanity with people around you. And that can be hard when things are really scary around us, right? I wrote a kind of blog post. I just chucked this in the last minute. But, you know, another thing to do is to look for the helpers around. You know, when there's a lot of uncertainty and things are looking really, really bad, you know, try and think about, there's always people out there who are doing great work and helping. You know, I think of people like Lisa Crispin in the testing community. She's always there with a word for someone. She's always there to review a blog post or to support someone when they're talking. And there's countless and countless of other people. You know, Richard Bradshaw does an amazing work in the testing community, and really how he's reached out and helped people. You know, and that there's many, many people like that in our community. And I think, you know, sometimes it's a good reminder for us to realize that there is goodness around us, and there are people who are willing to help. And asking the question, in Australia, we have this Are You Okay Day, you know, just making the point of going to people and saying, look, are you okay? Just ask them. And I think not just ask, but also the important thing is to have that listening ear. You know, really sit down and listen to them. Don't just sort of ask for the sake of asking, because that's a good thing to do. But spend that time to really hear that person, and you know, see if you can really help. You know, even it's just having that listening ear can be useful. All right, so we're on to the lion. And the lion, he just wanted to be a brave lion, you know. I think the interesting thing about the lion is that when the Wizard of Oz came to him and gave him his medal, he's like, you've been actually courageous all the time, all along. And I think this has really been useful for me to realize, because courage is not necessarily not being afraid. Courage is being afraid, acknowledging you're scared, acknowledging that it's tough, right? Acknowledging, facing reality, that's courage. So for me, that acknowledging where we are, facing that danger, but it's okay to feel frightened and to acknowledge that fear. So accepting that things are really uncertain, and maybe it's okay, you know, that's where we are at the moment. Now, for me, this has led to a lot of discomfort. You know, I'm the type of person that normally, you know, faced with uncertainty, I'm going to come up with a strategy and I'm just going to, you know, this is what we're going to do. And, you know, I'll put it all together and let's charge, let's move forward. I'm finishing it slightly different, but I'm really, really good at sort of being in that uncertainty and finding a solution. You know, and just to sit there and acknowledge that the uncertainty exists is really, really quite difficult. But I think it's made me a stronger person to acknowledge that in myself and to acknowledge that I am frightened. And I think it's important because what we're facing isn't necessarily just a short-term thing, right? Climate change is not a short-term thing. You know, the pandemic is not a short-term thing, you know. So we need to kind of look the long term. And what we're facing is just not an anomaly. It is, I think, to some degree, especially in tech, this uncertainty is kind of here to stay. So we need to learn how to work with it, to embrace it to some degree, and then to be able to respond to it instead of reacting, which is what has been my modus operandi in the past. Look, you know, Australians were the first person to rush out and just strip the country of toilet paper, you know, and I'm saying this, I was there too, right? I confess I went out and I bought extra toilet paper, and we actually took about 4 months before we actually got through it all. So, you know, but it's a really interesting phenomenon, isn't it? That when we face uncertain times, when we lack control and we respond in ways we don't quite understand, that don't necessarily make sense. Our response to that was to lock down, was to bulk buy and be ready for any emergency, and that include running out of toilet paper. And I think, you know, this is really understandable in the sense of we are going to behave in ways that do not appear useful. And I think it's useful to look around us and say, maybe the behaviors of people around us, it is a response to the uncertainty. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we just need to be kind here. And also, I think the response is, in my heart, I'm saying, is let's also look out for each other. You know, let's not panic buy when it comes to what's happening in our tech community. You know, let's not, you know, the fact that this is an online testing conference free for everybody, this is what it is. This is what it's about, right? This is how we move forward and deal with uncertainty. We do it through collaboration, not by hunkering down and holding all the pieces of the pie. So let's try and keep that going. And hats off to people like Joel who do all this super work in this space, helping all this information getting shared out. Did I get some brownie points, Joel, for saying that? Okay.
Of course you do. Come on. We're paying you for that. Kidding.
All right. I realize I'm probably going over time, so I'm going to race through this. Look, sometimes when you're faced with all this uncertainty.
By the way, apropos time, you have about I think it's negative 5 minutes, but I'm enjoying it. So you have another 2 or 3 if you can.
Okay, I am nearly done. Sometimes with all this uncertainty, the best thing to do is do nothing. You know, I was in this, as head of engineering, one of the things I did was go to the management meetings in this fintech. And, you know, there was just, it was a particularly difficult time for the company. And all the managers would sit, and they all came from different sections of, you know, finance, marketing, sales. And we all sat there, and often, you know, the uncertainty was so big that all these ideas were coming from everywhere. And it was really, really challenging. And sometimes the behavior came out that wasn't fantastic. I'll be honest, it wasn't great behavior. And, you know, I sat there and I couldn't figure out what to do. You know, how did I respond to this situation? And a really dear friend, Linda, said to me, she's like, Anne-Marie, you don't have to do anything. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing. And that's what I did. And you know what? There were so many people coming up decisions, you know, things got resolved. And I didn't necessarily have to do anything in that space. By doing nothing, I was doing something. So that was kind of useful. So how do I summarize on what's this all got to do with courage? For me, courage is saying, maybe we should test less, or let's do more exploratory testing, or let's test earlier. These are courageous actions. Courage is trying something new without knowing if you're going to succeed or not. Courage is acknowledging mistakes. Courage is speaking out. And I think courage is, for me, what I've learned sort of in the last years, courage is acknowledging your humanity, my imperfections and my limitations as well, because, you know, realizing I can't do it all. And courage is letting people help you. And finally, so you can see I've learned a lot this year, courage is taking time to breathe and say, I need to break. I've had enough. So I think these are really valuable things. Anyway, I hope it's what I've learned. Finally, look, at the end, the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy discovers, that wizard and Emerald City, totally useless. She's discovered she's got the secret all along, right? All she had to click was to the ruby slippers 3 times and she should go home. And I think, to some degree, these are things that we have in ourselves. We have courage, we have our brains, we have great heart. It's about acknowledging that we have these things inside ourselves, and maybe acknowledging that they are in others as well. And that if we look to that and we look to our strengths and we look to our abilities, that we'll always have something to ground ourselves. Or as Glinda says, home is knowing your mind, knowing your heart, knowing your courage. And if we know ourselves, we're always home, anywhere. So that's it. I have got 110 different links if you want to take a photograph, or I'm sure the slides, I can share the slides later. And that's it. Thank you for listening to my story about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. I'm done. Will I stop sharing?
I'll just steal it from you. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe in democracy. It's overrated. I think that we will see that. I'm lost for words, meaning it's been a while since I learned so much in a session about stuff that I already knew but forgot that I had known. And I was commenting with someone else that you just did a session not about testing, but about testing. So anything else that I say, I'm just going to ruin it. So thanks, I guess.
That's okay. You're welcome.